from our last video, I've been working on 1 Kings 18 and 19, and I presented the framework, and I'm going to introduce this 1 Kings 19 with a little bit of reference to the framework here, because this is setting up the context for what we're going to see here. And you'll notice that I've got quite a bit of commentary plugged in. All the solid gray bars don't have commentary. You can see my cursor is just a regular arrow, but when I hover over one of those decorated bars, it turns to a hand. So there's a click event that's going to bring up a pop-up window like this. With regard to the concise structural unit being presented here, this passage from the end of chapter 18 and the first 2 verses of chapter 19 doesn't technically belong here. They're part of the framing context as demonstrated in a separate study. Yet, because it is still very contextually relevant to the message, I'm including it here. The use of the expression "by this time tomorrow," which you see right here in 19 verse 2, gives emphasis to the subject of timing. It puts a focus on specifics of a marking of the exact time of day and the passage of a specific length of time. This suggests a theme of the esoteric level as Elijah responds to that threat and flees Jezreel, which involves the details of marking time and its passage in the context of the preservation of God's people. Now, in the context, I'm going to remind you that 1 Kings 18 is a companion to this text. They're paired together. And 1 Kings 18, in that section, it's about a contest that was held between the prophets of Baal and Asherah and Elijah on Mount Carmel. And as a consequence of the false prophets failing, they were slain by the river Kishon. And so what happens now is very strange, because Elijah just had a great victory and put all the prophets to shame and slew them. So now we're going to find that he's terrified and he's running for his life. So that's quite a turn of events that should really have our attention, and it should point out in a very emphatic way that there's something very significant going on here. In 1845b, and Ahab rode and went to Jezreel, and the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he gathered up his garment and ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he, Elijah, was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. Now, this context is marked out by a journey. He begins in Jezreel, and he flees, and he comes to Beersheba. And then you can see in the green highlighted verse 4a, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. So he's in his second location. And now in his third location, he goes on a journey in the strength of food to Horeb, the Mount of God. And then from there, he travels again. And in verse 19a, he goes to find Elisha, the prophet. And he's going to anoint him as a prophet. So what's going to happen is that we're going to see these transitions marking out the structure of this passage. Now, if this seems kind of familiar, it's probably because you've watched those videos we did where we present 51 examples of the keystone pattern and the reset of time, because we not only introduce 1 Kings 18 there, we also introduce 3 keystone patterns from 1 Kings 19, and we're going to point those out. And there's actually 5 here. One is overlapped or entangled with another. And since I've taken the time to go through and populate a pretty extensive amount of teaching in a sequence of commentary, we're going to take a time and explore that. But first, I want to make an effort to communicate to you a little bit about what the structure is and why it appears in this way. And if this kind of thing isn't familiar to you, I call this an interactive presentation of thematic structure or symmetry. Some call it chiasm or parallelism. It's been called a lot of different things over many hundreds or thousands of years even. But yet most people don't understand that this is part of the reality of the Bible. This is a mark of God's word all the way from Genesis through to the book of Revelation. And this is a text of the ESV. That's the English version. And nothing's been added, changed, subtracted. It's just a straight text. What I've done here is I have done line breaks that are natural to the actual orderly structure of the narrative. And I've arranged it in such a way that I have highlighting to match up the companions visually more easily. And I've also created bars which give me an anchor point for commentary windows also, and it also allows me to compare single lines with multiple lines or multiple line sections with multiple line sections, and it allows me to illustrate a granular context. So visually, the interest seems to be in this section here, which is rather unique. So I'm going to begin here, and I'm going to show you first that there are 4 of a kind. There are 4 repetitions here, and they are repetitions in order. If we call in this first set this text spanned by this bar, if we consider that as the A element, then this is the next, or B. And as a repetition of the A, this would be an A prime or an A sub 1, A sub 2, A sub 3. And how do we know that this is the case? Well, let's simply compare. In this first part, we've got, and behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains, and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. So the subject is the Lord passing by in a great and strong wind. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. These B elements are very plain and simple. And so we have the wind, we have an earthquake, and we have a fire, then we have the sound of a low whisper. And in the first 3 things, the Lord's not in it. But then after the 4th, we have something different. And it's implied that the Lord is in it, the Lord who passes by. So if that sounds like a keystone pattern, yes, indeed, it is a keystone pattern. 3 things of a kind followed by a 4th that's similar, but different and fulfilling. And when we expand outward, moving to the left, those bars we see that this section here has a companion locally in 11a, and then it has a companion in a less local context there in verse 15b through 17. And how do they compare? Well, these things are pretty obvious when you take enough time to go through and just look at the highlighted sections, look at how the bars illustrate the divisions, and it becomes very evident that the structure is legitimate. Sometimes the exact same words are used. Sometimes it's in contrast. Sometimes the comparison isn't completely obvious, but yet we know that these elements are compared because the rest of the context being symmetrical makes it plain. And oftentimes when it's less apparent on the surface, there's something more important that's very profound on the esoteric level. And because this really is an esoteric communication, this matter of the structure, it oftentimes will expose or affirm to us our understanding of the esoteric context. Now, because the keystone pattern has to do with time, this pattern involves a count of Shemitah off from the celestial sign of 1991. That's the importance of the keystone pattern. We know that where there's a keystone pattern, there's an esoteric time element being called to our attention. And there's a number of points that we've made over the past several months about how the structure suggests to us the reset of time and the doubling of the Shemitah. And that is very often the case. And oftentimes in these scenarios, the things that are mentioned is the four elements or the five elements. These things give us a clue about the matching up of the Shemitah, certain things that are happening during these different Shemitah. So you've heard us say these things before, and I'm repeating it now so that you are refreshed in your memory and you have your mind working and you're alert to see what's going on here. Now, I'm going to go through a couple of these other blocks to show you that the structure here is legitimate. And I'm going to go through another keystone pattern down here. And you can see that this one has quite a few columns of bars. And so I'm going to start here and review the meanings of these lines so that you see that this block is legitimate. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu the son of Nimshi you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha the son of Shaphat, of Abel Maholah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And so this is repeating in order. This part is repeated in this part down here and in order. And it should be apparent that this kind of a structure is very similar to what we see up here, where the Lord's not in the wind after the wind and earthquake, but the Lord's not in the earthquake. And it's the same kind of a language construction here, because we read in verse 17, and the one who escaped from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. So it's a highlighted sequence, again, of three things. And then there's a fourth thing that's similar, but different. And what's similar about it? Well, in the sequence, people are put to death here. But here, in the fourth thing, people are spared from destruction. So there's a contrast. And instead of the evil people being put to death, who are idolaters, these are not idolaters. They have not bowed the knee to Baal. And these are not only spared, these are a special remnant that the Lord brings to our attention. And when I hover over the bar here, you'll see I've got it matched up in the local context up here. So you see that this, on this level, on the lower end there, is a chiasm, because we have an A, and then it matches to an A prime that's in the bottom. And sandwiched in between We have a B and B prime, A, B, B prime, A prime. So this part that I showed you, that is a 3-part repetition. There's a keystone pattern right here. And this part matches to this, where the Lord said to him, go return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And this part that matches to it, the B prime, is what he's going to do. So here's his commission. Go, and this is what you're going to do when you arrive. And this is what's going to happen. Now in the A and A prime part, I talked about verse 18, and that matches up with this part in the end of chapter 13, or I'm sorry, the end of verse 13 and in verse 14. And you can see in the green up above, it matches up almost exactly. And this is something that we pointed out and have gotten really excited about. And this is really a very outstanding feature in this whole context because of this repetition. And what's phenomenal about this is that it's like something happens and then deja vu. It happens again, and it's like there was no acknowledgement that it had happened before, which seems completely bizarre. And so this part here should really get our attention. And it not only draws our attention to the saving of a life, because a key expression in there, which you see I've got highlighted in green, Elijah says, and I, even I only, am left. And this is what's answered by verse 18. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel. God is making a point to counter the belief that Elijah had that he was the only one left. God is affirming to him, no, you're not the only one left. And this remnant of a people like unto Elijah is really the point. And this is a beautiful thing because this is the keystone. This is the 4th thing in the keystone pattern. And so this is really strongly emphasized. And alongside this 4th thing in the keystone pattern, which we equate to the 4th year of, the 4th Shemitah in the set, which is spanning from 2012 to 2019. This reset, this repeat, is matched up to that exactly in the structure. And I'm going to read here from verse 9, line B through 10. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And when we come down to the end of verse 13 and verse 14, and behold, there came a voice to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? He said, wait, what? Didn't you just ask me that? No, but shouldn't he? What's going on here? He acts like this never happened before, but there it was. And it's not a scribal error. Look at the structure here. This structure is perfectly symmetrical. This actually happened. And it's not that Elijah just has a bad memory. This is something that's here for us. Elijah said, verse 14, I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. Yeah. This is not a glitch in the matrix. This is informing us something about time. We're talking about time here because this has to do with keystone patterns. There's 5 of them here. Like I said, I'm going to show you all those 5 keystone patterns, the reset of time. I mean, if this isn't a reset of time, time reset back to the beginning in a repeating, and I've never seen such a thing. And I believe it's telling us that not only did this happen once, this is a historical event that's legitimate, it's going to happen again. It's informing us this is a prophecy about the future. What was will be. So when we consider how the structure is organized here, this really has to speak to us, affirming those other things that we've been covering from so many other passages of Scripture, from other highly ordered structures, from other revelation insights we've had about other passages of Scripture. These things just continue to resonate this truth. And if you have a mind to hear from God directly, then just ask Him directly. Get concerned about the reality of the times and press in and ask Him. Ask Him to direct you, to confirm to you things. You don't have to wait on us. We're not oracles. We're not going to give you specifics about what you need to do. But there may be specifics about what you need to do, and you'll have to get those from the Lord. So we encourage you to do so as you're inspired. And we do hope that you take inspiration from these things that we're showing you, because that's what they're for. So in this section, we have an alignment of various kinds. And as you explore them, you'll see that some of these are very, very obvious. Now here in 11, verse 11, line A, it says, "And he said, go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." And in 15a, then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus." So the Lord is giving him specific direction. But there's more to it than that. There's a doubling here about the direction. Because when Elijah arrives at Horeb, this entire section here is divided in two, which you can see by these 2 bars. And he comes to a cave and lodges in it. And then he goes out and stands at the entrance of the cave. So there are many layers here of the direction. And the direction that God gives for relocating is very important, because these instances or these occasions of the Lord directing and then the following of that direction for relocation, these reveal the structure. The entire structure here is pivoting on those directions. Now, I'm going to just show you a little bit more about the design here from the details, and then I'm going to describe a little bit more about the basic structure and then start clicking through on the windows. So if you need a break to get a cup of coffee, go for it. Get yourself wide awake, settled in. Maybe you'll need to cycle through this a couple of times. And if it takes you 15, 20 times to get through, well, you probably will have spent far less time than it took me to, to get this to this place. All right, so down here, we've got a lot of bars. Let's see what's going on here. I'm saying that this one has a companion there. So, and he left the oxen. And he took the yoke of oxen and sacrificed them and boiled their flesh with the yokes of the oxen and gave it to the people, and they ate. Yep, I would say he's pretty much burning the bridge and leaving it behind him. The oxen he is leaving. And ran after Elijah. Then he arose and went after Elijah and assisted him. Yeah, when you break it out that way, it's pretty obvious. When you're just reading along in the text, it's not so obvious that these are important alignments. But sometimes it's these obvious ones when you get right down to the the nitty-gritty, that it informs you about having the rest of it put together in a correct way, and then the more profound things come to light. So as I move up and over on this bar, we've got it matched up, so we see that this is a repeating in order. This part is repeated down here in order. This part to that part. And then when I've gone out to this bar, we see that this is part of a chiasm. This would be an A and a B and a B prime. Here, the B prime and the A prime. And it skips over this line because it's involved with this other section. It's very precise and detailed. But is it really so? Do they align? Elijah passed by him and cast his cloak upon him. And he said to him, "Go back again, for what have I done to you?" And so this is the part that Elijah does. And this is the part that Elisha does. When you break it out that way, it seems very obvious. This is what Elijah does. This is what Elisha does. And in what Elisha does, there's the oxen part, leaves the oxen and goes after Elijah. And then there's this other part. He said, "Let me kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow you." And he returned from following him. That's really a pretty obvious matchup. So, is this block validated? I think you should see that it is. Let's go up to this block, talk about this a little bit. This part is repeated here. In what way? Well, here again we have a chiasm. A, B, B prime, A prime. Who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen matches up with the 12th. In front of him, and he was with. So this is his relationship, his positioning with regard to the 12. And he is as the 13th, right? So Elisha, you would have to say, is being illustrated as a master of time, plowing with 12 yoke of oxen. And this is, of course, also relative to Israel, but it's because of the time context, should be definitely seen as Elisha being picked out as he's demonstrating the mastery of time. Let's go up here and review this briefly. So with this, I'm saying this is repeated here, and it's repeated in order. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And this is about the angel. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey's too great for you." So there's an angel, touches him, tells him, "Get up and eat." And he ate and drank and lay down again, and he arose and ate and drank. Pretty obvious match up there, right? And now, in this local context up above, that matches with that one. So we see this part of 4b and c is going to be repeated in verse 5 through 8a. And it's going to be repeated in order. A, B, A prime, B prime. So I just showed you this block, that's the B prime, and that matches up with the B section. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." And what is the answer to that? Well, here's the answer to that. Is the Lord going to take away his life? No, the response is to preserve it. Angel food cake, that'll work. That had to give him some encouragement and strength enough to travel for 40 days and 40 nights, which is a trial number, a trial period. So that took care of that. Are you going to die? Nope, not going to die. Lord had another plan for him. And now in these A parts, he comes and sits down under a broom tree. And that matches up to 5A. And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. Obvious matchup. And why do we have that? Well, again, the structure is being determined by location and relocation. That is the single most important thing to pay attention to as the structure is laid out for us here. And in that regard, we're going to see that that also very much has to do with conveying the matter of timing to us. So we see here by these two bars, and this one again is just for an introduction to provide the framework for what's here. And so this part is in 2, and this is repeated here. That's why I've highlighted them both in blue. So this is repeated here. And how so? Well, as I hover onto the next, it's down there. So we know it's a chiasm, right? Should be familiar to you by now. So this is a chiasm at this level. And verse 3 is matched up with verses 19 through 21. And how so? Well, as I hover over this, look at that. This one's not a chiasm. This one's in order. So this is repeated down at the bottom in order. This matches up to that. This blue matches up to that blue. And as I go down to this part, this I'm saying is repeated here. And how so? Again, it's in a same order kind of a way. And I'm saying that with the green, that these 4 sections have a similarity. And it's the kind of similarity that I already pointed out, that the transitional elements of his journey are the key. So all these things are indicated by the structure, and the validity of the structure can be seen as you go through the details of it, like I've done and covered the main part of it. So you should have a sense by now of how to work your way through. And it will be more apparent if you've done your homework, and you'll have a sense of why it is that I make a point of describing the structure. Because it is important, and the structure does sometimes convey to us something very important about the scene. Now I've clicked on this first bar here, spanning verses 3 to 8a. As you see, I've illustrated at the top. What is written here is repeated in 8b to 21 in reverse order. And then I outline it for you there. This is what we've already seen as I've stepped you through it. These 4 elements display the keystone design of Elijah's journeys. The keystone design of Elijah's journeys. Isn't that interesting? And we've seen this kind of thing before when we talked about the trips that Joseph's brothers made into Egypt during the famine, and when they came before Joseph, and then they went back to the land of Canaan to their father, and then they came in again. And Joseph was orchestrating something very significant. And in their journeys, we discovered there's a keystone pattern that's very significant. And there's much to be compared. But these journeys and the legs of the journeys that form the structure should speak so loudly to you about the legitimacy of the keystone pattern with regard to time. While in Jezreel, Elijah learns that Jezebel has determined to kill him, so he flees for his life, ending up at Mount Horeb. The structure presents his journey in 3 legs, where things are done at each location along the way to his destination. 1, from Jezreel to Beersheba. 2, from Beersheba to a broom tree in the wilderness, which is a day's journey away. 3. From the broom tree to a cave on Mount Horeb. At this point, Elijah's seeking of refuge has ended. He has an encounter with God where he's commissioned to go on the offensive. The fourth journey in sequence is from Mount Horeb back the way he had come, as Elijah finds his successor and begins to fulfill that commission. We know that these 4 scenes in the narrative are not merely isolated elements because the thematic structure plainly illustrates their relationship. Right? When I matched them up, you could see that they correspond, that there's a very specific correspondence in the structure and in the themes. So notably, within the B and B prime units of this chiasm, we find 3 more keystone patterns. However, there is another pattern overlaid upon the journey. We've identified the keystone design in the accounting of the journeys from place to place. When the 5 places themselves are considered, we discover that this remarkable journey displays the extended keystone design. Really? Yes, really. And here's a tip. Next comment window, click or tap on the bar spanning verse 3. So we find verse 3, find a bar spanning it, and there's only one that spans it entirely. There are 3 bars here, but these 2 span a single line. So I'm directing it to the bar, and I'm being very specific, spanning verse 3. So if you assume that I mean what I say, you'll be able to follow these directions pretty easily. So I'm going to click on this one. Boom, a whole bunch more words. Since I'm stepping through it little by little, I'm going to expand that so we can see better. There we go. Bigger text. Elijah's flight from Jezebel's assassins begins as he leaves Jezreel. And we know he's there from 1 Kings 18:45, which I put up right here. And he comes to Beersheba. The narrative describing this first leg of the journey is brief yet rich in its prophetic signification. As you will discover in further commentary, the reference to Beersheba adds significant light of its own. But let's give our attention first to the mention of Judah. When we're informed that Beersheba belongs to Judah, some would be content to see this as merely distinguishing the specific location from what was assigned to Judah's brother Simeon, which you can read about in Joshua 19, verses 1 and 2. Yet, there's so much more to it. With impressive redundancy, the keystone design is prominent in this chapter. This is the modeling of account of Shemitah from the celestial sign of 1991, a sign that has to do with Judah and the timely arrival and departure of servants. On his deathbed, Jacob prophesied about his sons, including Judah. The account of this prophecy, Genesis 49, verses 8 through 12, features a revelation about celestial activity in the constellation Leo. The stars and planets are servants that are the timekeepers, appointed to bear continual testimony about the Moedim, appointed times. And if you're not familiar with Psalm 19, you should get familiar with that. That's a fundamental here. So, reflecting on this, the leaving of Elijah's servant behind in that location speaks both to the nature of the celestial sign, and I'm making reference to what I've written at length about in Jacob's dying words, prophesy the celestial sign. And if you click that link, it'll take you right there. And a fixed marker in time as the journey through space and time continues on, counting off one unit of time after another. And I point these things out because when you get a sense of what's going on here, you see the connectedness of how the Lord has woven his word together. And if you've done your homework and you've been paying attention for a while, the depth of this is so profound. And if you're new here, you have no idea about the history, the background, the rich outlay of detail, what's woven together here. It's pretty extraordinary. It's like you're coming into a season where we're pretty much dealing with graduate level stuff. And if you've just figured out that math exists and how profound it is that 1 + 1 = 2, well, there's just so much more. So we rejoice with you that yes, 1 + 1 does equal 2. But for those of you who have been paying attention, there's a benefit for you here. And we're gonna lay it all out for you. And if you're compelled to find out more beyond the 1 + 1, all those resources we pointed you to already, you'll find plenty of help there. Now, reading again from the comment window, notice how verse 3 is sandwiched between verses 2 and 4. There's some math for you. Verse 2 is about time, by this time tomorrow. And verse 4 is about time, a day's journey. And not just generally, because both reference the same specific length of time, a day. So it is with verse 3 on the esoteric level. So it is with verse 3 on the esoteric level. And we're dealing with time in a very specific way. Next comment window, click or tap, if you've got a tablet or a phone, on the underlined text of verse 3a. Very specifically, the underlined text is this part. So there we go. Beersheba is interpreted by some to mean well of lion. And since Judah's constellation is Leo, the lion, there's harmony in that correspondence in the context. Beersheba is usually interpreted as well of the oath, because of the oath made there by Abraham, then later by his son Isaac. In both instances, it involved a well. Beersheba very literally means well of 7. Think water as time, which should be a very familiar metaphor, and of the well of time manifesting in a 7-fold way of repeating sets of days and years. Think Shemitah cycle. It's the heptadic nature of time waves. To make an oath is to seven oneself, according to a Jewish custom. And here in Genesis 21, reading about where the covenant was made by Abraham. Verse 30, he said, "These 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well." Therefore that place was called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. That passage is from the account of Abraham's naming of the place in Genesis 21. When you consider the account in chapter 26, where his son Isaac also names the place Sheba, even Beersheba, well of 7, a few points should speak very loudly as a witness to the pending reset of time that results in a repeating of this present Shemitah. There's a sequence inversion with regard to the well, which is to say time. Abraham digs a well and then makes an oath about it and then names the place as a memorial. His son Isaac later makes an oath in that place, and on the same day the oath is made, he learns that his servants had dug a well and found water. Isaac subsequently gives it the same name as if the former had never happened. These kinds of things are not random. They don't occur in the history of Beersheba in this context in the way that I've described for no reason. Beersheba, Abraham's well of 7 equals former Shemitah that seems to have been erased from history, from memory. Isaac's well of 7 equals the latter Shemitah, somehow being the same as the former, yet new in time. Same location on the calendar, 2012 to 2019. Making sense? Makes sense to me. Again, when you look at the context here and you compare how this leg of the journey is like this leg of the journey, is like this leg of the journey, is like this leg of the journey, it'll speak more loudly to you the more familiar you get with the details of what's going on here. So the direction to follow is click on the bar spanning verse 3a. That's this right here. This is the first of the 4 lines that identify the legs of Elijah's journey. These establish the 4 major thematic units of the context. The other lines are highlighted, but only 19a is in blue in color because that's the primary companion text as A and A prime in the chiasm spanning verses 3 to 21, which I already pointed out to you, right? This part here matches up with this part down here. I've got this 3a matches up specifically with this line here, but these are in green. They match up, but they're not the primary matchup because of this level. So I say the other 2 lines are highlighted in green because I'm trying to convey how they are related to 3a, but in a less direct fashion. So that's the convention I'm using here. So that's why you see blue and green. Next comment window, the bar spanning verse 3b. That's this little guy here. Now, we see how the theme here corresponds to 19b to 21 with the way Elijah's servant Elisha is featured. There it is in blue. Elijah is at first ready to leave him behind, but the end result is that Elisha goes with him to assist or serve him, in contrast to the leaving of his former servant behind in Beersheba. Do these really match? Yes, they do. And one of the great things that that does for us is these frame in making this entire thing such a very plain chiasm. It frames this and identifies this whole section of 3 to 21 as a contextual unit. And this becomes important when we recognize how in the greater structure of the framework, this is paired with that section that I call out in 1 Kings 18, and they compare very specially. And if you did your homework and you read the commentary and the framework, it's obvious to you that they are companion. Next comment window, bar spanning verse 4 to 8a. Here's 4 down to 8a. And here I just confirm as a useful reference point the section that I clicked on. And it should always be apparent which you clicked on, because see how the darker blue here stands out against the lighter blue? The darker blue is what you've clicked on when you have a comment window that freezes the highlighting. So with respect to this unit, which is the B of the greater A, B, B prime, A prime, right? So this is part of the sandwich. This is the second leg of Elijah's keystone journey. The structure here is the same as in each of the other legs. The details of the journey appear, followed by what happens in the new location. Very simple. The distance Elijah traveled into the wilderness is described as a day's journey, which is to say that it's defined in terms of the passage of time. While this descriptive language is common, that feature doesn't justify dismissing its potential importance. Because in this context, a measure of distance being given by the passage of time is notable. The keystone pattern is about the counting off of Shemitah. marking the passage of time from one period to the next, with time and distance being connected in the language of the narrative. We see Elijah going from one location to the next as from one Shemitah to the next. This leg of the trip involved a day's journey, and the next leg of his journey, which is paired with this one as B and B prime companions, is described entirely in the very specific amount of time it took to get there, being 40 days and 40 nights. See that here? So, what happens in the wilderness under the broom tree presents us with another keystone design and doublings that suggest the doubling of a Shemitah. Elijah had just gone a day's journey from Beersheba, and it should be noted that it was after leaving Beersheba that Jacob had a dream about angels. And it was there that he received a promise that the esoteric layer shows the promiser's faithfulness to. And I'm going to read that section here from Genesis 28. Verse 10, Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. So he's on a journey, and he left Beersheba. Familiar, right? This is what Elijah did. And he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. That's a timekeeper. This is a time notation, called their attention. Taking one of the stones of the place. Hey, wait a minute. Stones and time. He put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Some would call that a stargate, a wormhole. And one should. And see the connection with the stone here. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Space-time ritual, anyone? Who invented that? God did. The devil only is a counterfeiter. He takes what he's got, does what he can with it. But all he can do is only what's allowed to him and granted to him and given to him to use by the sovereign God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so his leaving Beersheba, if you understand about the history, you should see a connection here. Okay, so in this direction, we're told to go to the bar spanning 4B to 8A, which is this one here. The structure is such that what is written in 4B to C is repeated in 5 to 8A in order, which you know how to figure that out, right? How to view it. And I give you the direction right there. This repeating is a doubling, and within the second part is another doubling that involves the angel feeding Elijah. A keystone pattern is evident here. So the instances of doubling speak to us in that context of the doubling of the fourth Shemitah as the fifth repeats the same calendar years of 2012 to 2019. And I just lay it out and make it plain there because we're not trying to be cryptic here. We're not going to make vague reference. From time to time, I'm just going to anchor it, telling you plainly what's going on. Here's how the keystone pattern appears. 1, Elijah arrives and is apparently weak from the journey. He rests, sitting down under a broom tree. 2, despairing, Elijah asked to die, lays down and sleeps. 3, angel interrupts his rest, feeds him, and Elijah lays down again. See that? See what's going on? That's ending with verse 5 and 6 here. And now, verse 7, watch this. Here's the fourth thing. The angel interrupts his rest and feeds him again, making reference to the journey that is so crucial to the esoteric modeling. Does it say he laid down and rested again? Well, and he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the Mount of God. Does he lay down and rest again? Well, he does 3 times. The fourth time, no way. He's out of there. He is gone. He came here as kind of a rest stop. That was his point. Goes through the 3 things. Gotta have this stuff happen. And then the fourth thing, and off he goes. He's got everything he needs. 3 and done. So, Aaron, you want to make an observation?
Just looking at that last part there in verse 8, an argument might be made that there's almost another keystone pattern there. He arose, ate, drank. Those are 3 things. Then the fourth, he went, he left. So I don't know if we could see that as a keystone pattern there in the fourth or not. I thought I'd bring it up.
Yeah, I see that as legit. He rose 1, ate 2, drank 3, and the fourth thing he went. In the strength of that food, which is what the first 3 things were about. Getting that food. So yeah. So you could say that would be a 6th keystone pattern in this resonant section. And there may be more. I don't know. But the Lord has saturated this in keystone patterns. And in the companion text of 1 Kings 18, that's centered on a very prominent keystone pattern. For what? For no point? Well, we're telling it plain. It has to do with the Count of Shmita from 1991, which involves not just a straightforward keystone pattern. It involves a reset of time back into the past to repeat the 4th and the 5th. This is what's resonating throughout this section. This is why I've been spending so much time on this with so little time remaining in this season. I've been camped on this. Why? Got nothing better to do. Yeah, because this is the good thing to do. This is what needs to be done. There is meat for the eater here. Strong meat. This is our provision. This is the kind of provision. This is the kind of grain of salvation. This is the banquet food that's laid out for us so that we can go in the strength on to fulfill our missions. This is the kind of food that we need. We can't make it on bread pudding and lime jello. Can't make it on that. So the next thing to click on here is the bar of 4b. So you see that right here. This compares very obviously with the other blue highlighted line, 5a. How so? Well, he lay down and slept under a broom tree, came and sat down under a broom tree. Yep, that's the Lord throwing us a bone. There's some structure based upon the location. Now, there's a matching element in the more remote context that should be explored further. So you get a sense of just how parallel the narratives are that present the second and third legs of Elijah's journey. Close this comment window or keep it open in another window. If you've got multiple monitors or lots of screen real estate, it's oftentimes useful to leverage every bit of resource that you've got on hand to help you get a visual, to help you get in mind and help you to grasp the reality of these things that we're describing here. I've got a bunch of screens to look at. I've got lots of real estate. I have been camping on this stuff for a long time. For you to see the legitimacy of what I'm telling you, it may take some effort. It may take a lot of effort. As the Lord leads and provides, go for it. This is oftentimes going to inspire other insight. It's going to allow you to recognize a sign, perhaps, that the Lord is bringing your way. The Lord's not done yet in this season. It's like in a race. If you get up to the last leg and decide, man, I'm just going to lay down and take a little nap here, guess what? You lose. Yeah. It may have been a marathon for you. It may be a sprint. Either way, the thing to do at the end is push hard, give it all you got. And so we encourage you to take full advantage of the provision that the Lord has made for you in this season. So how parallel are these narratives? I'm going to close the window, and then we're going to click on the one that spans 8b to 18. So that's this big one down here. So as I close this one, I'm going to be exploring these sections here. And we've got a 4B and C repeated in 5 through 8A, and then it matches up to verse 9 through 13B. And to see the matchups here, we've already talked about that up at the top with the angel food. We've also got a correspondence here with this section, and we've talked about how this is aligned. And we've talked about how this is involved in the next section, this part about Elijah and the big repeat. So this is all what happens at Horeb. This is all what happens a day's journey into the wilderness. Here it involves a cave, right? That's the positioning and the relocation, where we see a doubling in what happens at Horeb. And it's the broom tree location where we find the doubling in the day's journey into the wilderness. And so there's a very close correspondence in this B and B prime set of companions. And I'm going to move on to this next set here. As I describe it pretty well, I have populated these comment windows pretty extensively, as you can see. So you can do some homework and you can reflect on these things, and you can watch the video here as many times as you want to, and I recommend that you pause it and take some time to explore what I've got published up. And before I go into this, I'm going to go ahead and click on the comment window I've got on this one right here, because it's just kind of a stray that I haven't pointed to. But as you explore, you'll find there's an occasional stray that I haven't pointed to that's there for you to see. Hot stones in a jar of water. This is the baking of the angel food cake, right? It's such a miraculous provision. Prepared by an angel, suggesting the nature of the provision. Spiritual, supernatural food. And that's what we need. That's what we've got in front of us today. I note that in so many accounts, we see stones and water together in biblical time ritual scenarios. Baked on hot stones in a jar of water. Why? For no reason? Could it just as well have been anything, like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? No. No. This is special food that has to do with time and discerning the time. Okay, so now I can't really get this out of the way and look at that other thing, so you're going to have to put it in another window or take a look at it while you're just listening to this video, if you like. I'm going to read this. Within this narrative, we find one of the most awesome illustrations of the resetting of time, comparing with what happened at the scene of Yeshua's confrontation at Gethsemane at the scene of his arrest, as recorded in John 18, 4 through 8. Remember that? The arresting party comes, and they're looking for Jesus. He says, "Yep, I'm he." And they all fall backward and fall to the ground. And then they get up, and the scene repeats. And you got to wonder, is somebody there thinking, scratching their head going, deja vu? There's a glitch in the matrix. But again, no. It's the reset of time. And there's a keystone pattern there. So the symmetrical structure very closely matches the companion text of verse 4 through 8a, as we've noted already. Completing the third leg of his flight from Jezebel, Elijah arrives at Mount Horeb, his apparent destination. What happens here represents the completion of a season of preparation, and this is the foundation of a keystone pattern. Elijah has an encounter with the Lord on the Mount of God and receives a commission. When he departs from Horeb, he is no longer on the defensive or lacking in preparation. He is in striking contrast, embarking on a strategic offensive, which he carries out in the authority of the office of a prophet. In a very personal way, this particular text resonates a pivotal moment in the year 2008, on the 13th day of the first month on the Lord's calendar. This was within the third Shemitah, as counted off from the sign of 1991, which was a span of 2005 to 2012 from Yom Teruah to Yom Teruah, which corresponds to this third leg of the keystone pattern modeling prophecy in this journey that Elijah is making. The completely obvious point of connection involves this pattern. Nested within this very passage spanning 8b to 18 are two very distinctive keystone designs. The pattern which was discovered on that day in 2008. I was watching for the sign for the bride, and yet I was led to be quite fully engaged in working out the thematic structure of John 13. At the close of the day, as I was acknowledging that the sign was not witnessed and accepting what it meant, I came to verse 38 and had an insight that was immediately bittersweet. Jesus answered, "Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you've denied me 3 times. John 13:38. This was my introduction to the keystone pattern. Why this keystone dense passage of the third leg of Elijah's journey resonates that keystone discovery day in the third Shemitah in the count so strongly with me is the impression I have of being in a setting not very unlike Elijah's. And yeah, I'm just reading that to you now, but I'll tell you, when the Lord opened this up to me as I was preparing this study, it took me about a day to really, to process this. It was very intense. I'm down in the mine laboring away, and the rest of the world just kind of goes away, and it's the Lord and me, and bringing forth so many times a reflection on his dealings with me in the past and helping me put things together. So this story I'm communicating here, when I tell you about this impression I had, it's not a small matter. It's not just a light impression. This really puts some resolution to something that I have reflected on many times over the years. Because at the time, I had a very strong impression of being isolated. As I'm reading again here, I was isolated, being completely alone at home all day with a very, very narrow focus, but with God's nearness being very evident. And his presence was very heavy on me, and he was prospering the work that I was doing in no small way. It was distinctly cave-like in my little apartment on that day when the sky was so overcast. And this was a very strong impression I had all day, how how cave-like it was. It's very dark, very overcast, raining, and the impression was tangible. So this is the context of the revealing of this keystone pattern. And so in how much time I spent immersed in this study and the writing of the commentary here, reflecting on Elijah being in the cave and the Lord dealing with him there and manifesting two dramatic keystone patterns here. I have to say, it just speaks so loudly to me about the third Shemitah, because this was in the middle of it, 2008. And this is that section at Horeb. It's the third leg of his journey. So it just really, it's very personal. It has a emotional component to it. So my attention was focused intently during that time and that day on the computer monitor, and everything else around it, was just outside the realm of God and me in the cave setting there. And even though it was a time for watching for the sign to the bride, which means scanning the news, I did that so, my focus on that, my attention on that was so limited, because the Lord was just compelling me and drawing me so closely to be isolated with him in this study of John 13. It culminated in the revelation about the keystone pattern. So I don't know if that speaks to you, but it speaks so strongly to me. There were some other things that kind of compared to it over the last several weeks in this study of this remarkable 18th and 19th chapters of 1 Kings. So I'm going to keep moving through here. Next comment window, 8b. That's this little guy right here. Horeb, the Mount of God, is the same location where Moses had met God in Exodus 3. The burning bush that Moses encountered was not consumed, and this phenomena should be compared with the wind, earthquake, fire that Elijah witnessed when the Lord passed by. The Lord spoke to Moses from the midst of the bush, and Moses hid his face. Elijah heard the sound of a low whisper, which we can infer that God was in, and he wrapped his face in his cloak. It's a match. Moses was commissioned to go set his people free from the oppression of idolaters, and so was Elijah. And these patterns aren't just matching for no reason. There's meaning in this. Why did he go to Horeb? Because there's meaning here. God is repeating things. So next comment window, verses 9 to 13b. That's this guy right here. Horeb, the Mount of God, is the fourth of the 5 locations featured in 1 Kings 19's account of Elijah's journey. With respect to the accounting of the locations themselves instead of the trips between them, what happens at Horeb represents the 4th Shemitah from 1991, right? Because it's the extended keystone pattern with the locations. With the journeys between them, it's a regular keystone. With the 5 locations themselves, it's the extended keystone. They're woven together. So this is why I'm shifting here and pointing this part out. And here's the graphic you should be very familiar with. It's got the 4 things and then a 5th, but the 5th thing here is overlaid in place of the 4th over 2012 to 2019, because this is the repetition we talk about. As we account these in numbering from the beginning, it's number 860 and 861. But from the celestial sign of 1991, there's a new count that begins in our local time frame, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I point out 2008 was here, Shemitah 859 in this 3rd Shemitah in the count. So the pronounced doubles in this text and its companion in blue. speak most loudly to us from this perspective. Think about it. Elijah comes to a cave and lodges in it, and what happens then as he goes out and stands on the mount presents a distinctive keystone design. So Elijah returns back to the entrance of the cave where he had been before, modeling the repeating of a Shemitah. What happens then presents another distinctive keystone design. However, this second time he's given a specific commission, and this begins to be fulfilled when Elijah leaves Horeb on the next leg of his journey that is very different from the others since his departure from Jezreel. From fear to no more fear. Next comment window, 9b to 13b. What happens on Mount Horeb is extremely dramatic and strange, and this is given a huge amount of emphasis by the many structural parallels in the surrounding context. As structures do in the physical plane, and whether you perceive it or not, these resonant linguistic structures are all energetically or spiritually vibrating together in a kind of musical harmony. It's the word, the singing of creation. I've highlighted the less local companion element in green to illustrate the connection with a corresponding element. It bears repeating here that a keystone design appears there. See comment for bar spanning 4b to 8a. Up there. So, which we've already done. The more local companion is highlighted in lighter blue, where another and even more closely matching keystone design is manifest. Say here's what it corresponds to in the green and the less local. And then this dark blue is the one I clicked on, and it corresponds very specifically in the structural relationship down here with the lighter blue. There's a keystone pattern up here, keystone pattern down here. So next comment window is 9b to 11a. It's this one here. So we see this matches up here in the local context, down here in the less local, and this is that big repeat that should speak so loudly to you about the conversation about Elijah thinking he's the only one. The most striking repetition in this entire context involves elements in these match sets. What we read in verse 9b is repeated nearly word for word in 13b to 14. If we widen our view slightly and compare the text of 9 through 11a with that of 13c to 15a, we find very little difference. And you can explore that yourself. The interaction that is repeating in the narrative is a kind of deja vu scenario. How can it be that Elijah doesn't say, wait, what? Something about this conversation seems so familiar. Is there a glitch in the matrix? Did the scribe responsible for transmitting the text accidentally stutter with an extra copy-paste that got past the editors? It fits the symmetrical structure perfectly, so no. There is no error in transmission. As to a glitch in the matrix, well, we see something of the kind where time itself is repeating, just like what happened when the shadow of the sun was turned back 10 degrees on the sundial of Ahaz as a sign to Hezekiah. Next comment window, 11b to 13b. When Elijah is standing on Mount Horeb and the Lord passes by, there are three things in sequence that God is not in: wind, earthquake, fire. But the last and fourth in sequence, in the sound of a low whisper, the converse is implied that he is. This is the keystone pattern we counted as number 30 of 51 in an off-reference video series. In the companion text, which is in the green here, is another keystone pattern, which has been accounted as number 31 of 51 in that series. With these two plus the third keystone in the narrative, the activities under the broom tree, and the fourth that Aaron mentioned, These all occurring within the keystone design of the stages of Elijah's journey and the extended keystone design of the 5 places involved. There are, add one to that, 6. This 19th chapter of 1 Kings is one of, if not the most keystone-rich passage we've discovered. I don't think we've covered one that compares to this. This is extraordinary. The verse numbers are worthy of our attention because in this text, the esoteric symbolism is supported. Verse 12 bears a number that so commonly signifies time, which suggests that the low whisper Elijah heard the sound of was a secret communication about time. And what else would it be? This is esoteric time drenched. This is all about esoteric time communication. So what is the content? What does Elijah hear? Well, it's a secret. What kind of secrets are we keeping here? Yeah, secrets about time. They're time secrets. Is that a stretch? Well, no, that's just an understanding of what's going on here. What was he telling Elijah? Yeah, when we record this, we're going to drench it in keystone patterns. And Elijah's like, what does that mean? I don't know. I don't know how it went. I don't know what the secrets are, but that is a prophecy for the future. That's not just what happened then. It's about what's happening now and what's going to happen as the Lord prepares us and brings all this to pass. And what he's bringing to pass here is more prophecy about the bride and the 144,000. That's Elijah in relationship to Elisha. So that's the 12. And then in verse 13, which begins here, we have a pivot, a major pivot on verse 13 here, dividing this whole section of Horeb, right? Verse 13 bears a number signifying the mastery of time, which suggests that Elijah is pictured putting the mastery of time on exhibit. This is very interesting in light of his response to hearing the sound of the low whisper, which God was in, and the subsequent pivoting of the narrative that models the reset of time back to repeat what happened as the Horeb scenario began. See that pivot right there at the entrance to the cave and the communication between Elijah and God. There's the pivot in verse 13. Next comment window, 15b through 18. That's this one here. Companion to the one we just clicked on. Here we find the keystone pattern that's been accounted as number 31 of 51 in our oft-mentioned video series. Elijah is commissioned to anoint 3 men who will act as executioners. They'll perform their duties in a sequence. Yet the 4th thing listed involves something that is not the purging of idolaters, but rather the preservation of a remnant people who are not idolaters, as I pointed out before. Instead of men anointed by Elijah, this 4th thing involves a people like unto Elijah, who perhaps have an anointing as by the hand of God himself. The particular flow of the language here is similar to that of its companion text in green, which features a keystone design with components that might seem radically different, but actually compare in a notable way. God is expressly not in the wind, earthquake, and fire. Likewise, God is not in Hazael, Jehu, and Elisha, which is why they must be anointed. God was in the comparatively very subtle sound of a low whisper, and likewise, God was in his 7,000 strong remnant. And then, of course, what is set forth in that next leg of the journey, Elijah's going to set forth and anoint. So God is going to be in these. This is how God works in his way of restoration. So my direction is next to click on the bar of verse 18 and little verse, and we've got a lot of commentary. Verse 18 is the A prime element in this very notable chiasm spanning verses 13d through 18, which you can explore on your own. I invite you to explore the structure so you can plainly see the pairing of verse 18 with 13d through 14. As the Lord responds to Elijah in his mistaken perception that he's alone in surviving Jezebel's effort to eliminate those who serve God. I also want you to give your attention to a close comparison of the companion text that I've highlighted in green. See what's going on here. Hate to cover it up with the window, but there we go. So verse 18 pairs with 13b, and this matching of the identification of a remnant people with Elijah's wrapping his face in his cloak is the kind of pairing that's more profound than superficial. It speaks to me of having a healthy fear of God. Remember, we're going to compare this to Moses here. A healthy fear of God, an appropriate level of respect for his authority. It's a sign of the Lord's presence and the manifestation of his glory. I've pointed out in another comment window how this account compares to when Moses encountered the burning bush in the same place. Consider Moses' response. I'm going to read from Exodus 3, verses 4 through 6. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." And he said, "Here I am." Then he said, "Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." And he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. The Hebrew word translated cloak in verse 13 is also translated mantle. This same word is translated glory in Zechariah 11:3. This garment is the same one Elijah throws over Elisha in 1 Kings 19:19, whom he was sent to anoint as his successor. Are the remnant people anointed by the Lord himself? In the esoteric context, yes, I believe so. And I believe the numbering of 7,000 here is signifying the number of a people who are going to be around fulfilling this in the season to come. Next comment window, verse 19a. According to the keystone design of the legs of his journey, this fourth in series represents a new direction, the returning back the way he had come. Yeah, returning back the way he'd come. Sound familiar? Turn back time. As reaching the fifth of 5 locations, this speaks to us of the extended keystone pattern that accounts for both fourth and fifth Shemitahs in series. Elijah is turned from playing defense and is trying to survive to having a lead role in the offensive. This line 19a is paired most directly with 3a up at the top. The beginning of a season that bears no apparent fruit is matched with a new beginning where fruit begins to manifest. Instead of just setting up, this is when it finally begins to come to pass. And so after time is reset, that's what it's going to look like. We're going from scrimmage into the big game. Next in series, the bar spanning 19b to 21. Plowing is a work of preparation for a planting and a harvest. According to the Bible's harvest allegory, the field is the Lord God's harvest field, and the crops are his people. Elijah is found plowing with the 12, so he's the 13th and master of the 12. With 12 signifying time and 13 the mastery of time, the reason why Elisha is chosen as a parent. He is plowing furrows in the earth, putting his mastery of time and space on display, doing a work of preparation for a great harvest. Next comment window, this last one remaining, 21b to c. On the esoteric level where the 12 yoked oxen signify time, with his mastery of time, Elisha sacrifices this set or cycle of time for the sake of the people, which suggests that a time cycle is sacrificed for the sake of feeding the people. That speaks to us of the Shemitah number 860, or the fourth in sequence from the sign of 1991, as in the accounting of this fourth leg of the Keystone Design Modeling Scenario, which for the sake of feeding the people with the grain of salvation, shall we say, this will be devoured as the 7 fat cattle, or the 7 good ears of corn were devoured in Pharaoh's dream, Genesis 41. And later, modeled as Pharaoh's magic serpents from Jannes and Jambres were devoured by the serpent rod of Aaron and Moses. We see these things repeating in type over and over again to convey the same message to us. We have different windows into the same events, and these come to us in advance to prepare us for what's to come. And again, I will say most people will be oblivious to this even as they're happening, but only after they happen will certain become aware of what just happened. But there's still a people who need to be prepared in advance, who are informed in advance. And so the Lord has taken and engaged me and Aaron and others in this work for a lengthy season so that we can be well prepared when the time comes. And should we be surprised? No. We should not be surprised. We should have a really good sense of what's going on, and not only what, but when. So when it does happen, we're ready. Thanks, everybody. God bless you. Bye-bye.